thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation to come down and speak to you today. I'm very happy to do that. It's especially good to be in the room with the people who are going to pay for this project, so I'm very happy to be here for that. I want to say, for starters, that we at the State of California feel we have a great partner in the Kern County Water Agency. We spend enormous amounts of time with them, of course, working with them on this project and many others, and the staff and directors have always been very responsive. We work well together. We work well together with them and the other state water project contractors and the federal contractors too. But you're well served by the agency that you have representing you. And of course, Senator Fuller is not only a great water leader, but one of the few left in the legislature who remembers. You know, there are not so many left in the legislature who remember the water battles that we've had in the past and the successes that we've had in the past, such as the water package of 2009. So you're very fortunate to have her as your representative. So I want to talk mostly about the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. When I give these talks, I usually have to start when I'm giving one in Orange County to kind of explain, you know, what the Delta is and where it is. And somehow I have a feeling in this crowd you know that stuff, so I'm not going to go through all that. But I do want to talk about where the plan is today and what the prospects are for it and your possible involvement in it. First, undoubtedly, those of you who follow this have seen that we received comments recently from the federal agencies and some state agencies on the documents that we have on our website today. And if you haven't seen them, we have on our website the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. Just Google that and you'll find it. The administrative draft of the plan itself and of the environmental impact report, impact statement, sort of combined document that analyzes the environmental impacts of the plan. And so you're welcome to go to the website, look at that any time. Probably most of you have read through it. It's only 24,000 pages. But if you haven't, there's a lot of summary material that you can get as well. So we put that up on the website about a month ago or so, and we've gotten comments back, sort of top-line comments, from the state and federal agencies who have to give us our permits under this plan. Very important. Well, let's just say that we got the unedited version, I think would be a fair way to describe it. We got pretty much direct comments from the biologists and engineers who reviewed our plan and our statements. And actually, that's okay. Some people have read through those and went, gee, those are so harsh, you're never going to get through this process, and they were so critical of this and that and a variety of things. But frankly, if that's the way they feel, we need to know now. We don't even have a public review draft prepared yet. We're still preparing that. And so we want to know as much as possible what these people think of these documents and whether we're going to get our permit or not. And while some of the comments, you could look at them and go, gee, this is going to be hard to overcome. In fact, we've had days and days and days of meetings with the federal agencies and the state agencies to talk through those comments and see which of them we can just correct, and there are many, undoubtedly we can correct, which of them need to be dealt with between the issuance of the draft document and the final approval next year, that we hope is going to be relatively early next year. That's a long period, it'll be several months, there are ways to deal with that. And which of the comments really aren't that relevant to what we're doing today, like how are our models? Is our modeling done the right way? Well, that's a very important question that's ongoing. Everyone wants to review the way we model, both inside our project and out of it. And that's an evolving process. We're not going to solve all the modeling problems in the world in this particular effort. So we've sort of triaged those comments. Our staffs, the state and federal staffs, are meeting every day for hours and hours, actually, to sort through those. And we are meeting with the principals, the directors of the state and federal agencies, actually tomorrow in Sacramento, to try to resolve how we're going to deal with these comments. So while people read them and went, oh, this is terrible, it really wasn't that terrible in a way, because we are leading up to a draft plan and a draft EIS for public comment, and we hope to get that out in October. And so we're close. Our own consultant said, okay, if you want to do that, if you actually want to get through that level of a review and get it out there in a public way, you will have to spend, in those 40 work days, or however many work days there are between now and then, 33 of them in all-day live edit sessions. That's literally what we're going to go through to get that document out in time. We have a letter from the Secretary of Interior saying we want to have a goal of October 1st to get these documents out. We're striving to meet that. And so we don't feel that we're falling behind or that we have insurmountable problems with the federal agencies. But I am going to go through some of the remaining issues that we do have to resolve with them. We're certainly not done by any means. So the question I always get when giving a talk to anyone who is in the service area of these projects is, how much water are we going to get and what's it going to cost us? And there are a number of ways of trying to figure that out, and I want to just talk about them a bit, because in the end, my personal view is it will not be the opposition, which I'm going to talk about in a little while, that will stop this project. It will not be lawsuits that will stop this project. It will end up being, if it doesn't make it, the unwillingness of the people who have to pay for it to actually write the checks. That's the obstacle we have to deal with. It's yourselves, it's Metropolitan, and so on. And so that's what we have to resolve, and I'm going to try to describe to you how we're going to try to settle the questions of how much water will there be and what's it going to cost. First of all, this is a habitat conservation plan. We've had a lot of those. You have them here in Kern County, LA, up in the Delta. Habitat conservation plans are pretty common now, and they usually work extraordinarily well. They preserve the species we're trying to preserve, and we allow development to go forward. And maybe one of the better parts of it is, usually when you get the plan approved, it attracts federal money. And we could use some of that. So we see some benefits in having the plan be successful. But in these plans, the question always is, what will be the limitations? What will be the limitations on the obligation of the people who get the permits, the state and federal agencies, yourselves, and so on? Where does your obligation stop? And that will answer the question of how much water can you really rely on? Well, that's a very hot topic with our federal colleagues. We're spending a lot of time on it. But if you read through the Fish and Wildlife Service comments, you saw at the end, they said, we have got to establish adaptive limits, which is another code word for what's the impact on the water supply and on the cost. And we don't know what that is yet, but we're going to have to tell you and everybody else very soon, because it's going to have to be part of the final documents, or the draft documents that come out this fall. But one way to look at it, one way that it might work is that we have a series of model runs that say, under the scenario that the fish need a lot of outflow into the bay. Okay, that's the worst case scenario for us in terms of water supply. Under that scenario, here's what we think the water supply would be under future conditions. It's a little less than 5 million acre-feet per year. We've been exporting on average about 5.3 million acre-feet over the last 20 years. So it would be a slight decline in the water supply, not so good. Under the scenario that the fish can be saved in other ways, that is by creating better habitat for them, we can see an export level that's up closer to 5.5 million acre-feet. And these numbers are not final, but they're in that kind of range. So we're in that range, but most people, being practical, say, well, look, we'd love to see that go up, but in fact, let's see what it's going to cost if we can't get it up above, in the neighborhood of 4.6 or something like that. Look at the worst case scenario. And we have to do that. There are a number of ways, though, of mitigating the worst case scenario. What is, to reduce the impact on the exported water supply? How can you do that? One way is something that the state and federal agencies and the water contractors call shared responsibility, and that is have a mutual obligation, not just at the cost of the exporters, but also at the cost of the state and federal government, to acquire water upstream of the delta that could be used to allow a greater level of export. Now that water could go to outflow, it could go to export. There's a lot of ways to look at it. You can look at it either way. But in any case, we've seen a willingness in talking to the various water agencies that are upstream to sell some water. I don't want to say how much. I don't think we know how much. But enough to make a substantial difference in the amount we could export. Perhaps get the level of export up to where it needs to be to make this project financially attractive. Those discussions are not done. They're being led by the water contractors. So yourselves, Kern and Met, and certainly Westlands and so on are very involved in those discussions. They're really leading those discussions. There's some other things we can do to make the project more affordable. Just the way you build it. This project, in today's dollars, it depends on whether you want to count it as discounted dollars or not, but it's going to be in the neighborhood of $14 billion to build these tunnels that we assume are going to be selected, or very likely going to be selected, in the final environmental documents. We can't commit right now to any project because of CEQA, but the governor and the Secretary of Interior have said what their proposed project is, so we know that. And one way to do it is better engineering. We have less than 10% of the design of this project done, and we are confident, at least I'm told by our engineers that we should be confident, that we can actually reduce the cost because we have very large contingencies in our cost estimates, 30 to 50% on some elements. We won't need that large a contingency once more engineering design is done. There are also ways that we think we can build the project that will be more economical. We've already decided that it would be economical to eliminate the very large pumps that we thought we'd have to have, the intermediate pumping plant, have the system work by gravity. So that's one way, design, build, there are a lot of concepts out there. Another concept that's particularly intriguing is something we would borrow from our friends in the transportation business, and that's called TIFIA. It's a federal program that allows the federal government to finance projects, obviously at a much lower interest rate than any of us combined, the state or the contractors, could get. The idea comes from one of the finance companies, and they call it WIFIA. They sort of stole it from the transportation people. And they feel that it could reduce the cost of financing by 1%. But for all those of you who finance projects, you know that reducing your financing cost by 1% hugely, potentially, could reduce the cost of the project. So that's sort of an attractive idea that we need to pursue. We could also look at a rate stabilization fund that might change the way the different contractors would allocate money to the project, early versus late, and perhaps try to make the ups and downs of the natural source of water supply, more affordable. So some of the people who are working on this from a financial point of view are looking at a rate stabilization fund as simply smoothing out the costs. Now, a touchy issue, but one that's going to have to be addressed, is what will be the relative shares of this project among the agricultural and urban contractors. Our own documents, and they're perfectly public, so it's no great revelation, our own documents say that from a financial point of view, most of the benefits of this project go to the urban agencies for the simple reason that an acre-foot of water building microchips in Silicon Valley naturally is worth more than an acre-foot of growing some particular crop or other. And so our economist, Dr. Dave Sunding from Berkeley, has said the lion's share of the benefits of this project go to the urban agencies. Now, in the Bureau of Reclamation, for those of you who are bureau contractors, that's a big deal because the value that you receive is helps determine your price. Of course, in the state project, we haven't done it that way. But nevertheless, in the end, as this project is discussed between the state and federal and between the ag and urban contractors, I think that there'll perhaps be at least some discussion, if not recognition, of the fact that the urban agencies are receiving most of the benefits of the project. Now, in the end, though, you will see, and I don't think this is going to be in the distant future either, you will see what we think is our best guess of what this project can produce for you and what the water is likely to cost. And some people might say, you know, I've got some alternative water supplies, I have groundwater, I have the Kern River, whatever. I don't think I can afford to add on to my state project cost this amount. And so that would be a request, in a sense, to opt out of the project. That has to be discussed at the Kern County Water Agency. You have to determine internally whether, in fact, you still want to have all that whole allocation that you have today or whether you want to divide it up internally. That's a discussion for you to have. In the end, though, we have to preserve the right of people to do what they want. This is a voluntary project. No one is going to be required to do anything. And so the opt-out has to be kept open if it needs to be inside the agency or outside of it. I do think, though, that we will see that the benefits of this project are so large that unless there's a huge level of people who don't want to participate, which we don't think is the case, the project would go forward even if some do not eventually want to participate. I want to say a word or two about storage because it comes up at a lot of meetings, water storage, and it's very interesting. You hear from Sonny McPeak, the former Contra Costa supervisor who is now with the Delta Vision Foundation. She was the leader of the opposition to the peripheral canal, and she just wants us to have storage as part of this program. You hear it from the environmental community. They recognize the benefits of more storage because of the way to better balance Delta exports. So we're very interested in it from the state point of view as well. However, we've got to be realistic about it too. Has anyone driven by St. Louis lately? I'm sure you've at least seen a picture of it. We have some storage that we're not using very effectively right now. It's, what, 400,000 acre-feet or something like that. And so we've got to fix the delta to better use our existing storage. Then we see in the studies that we've asked CH to run for us that have been pretty effective, that storage could be a big benefit. But protecting our existing 5+ million acre-feet of export, that's got to be the #1 priority. A storage project of any kind, whichever one you want, is going to produce maybe a couple, 300,000 acre-feet of new water. That's great, we want that. But first, let's be sure we protect what we have, because without that, we can't do very much. One thing that's sort of encouraging, though, is that the Bureau of Reclamation does have on the street now the draft environmental impact statement for enlarging Shasta, and so that may rise to be a project that has a lot of value. A lot of people are looking at that one. So there's some other problems we have to deal with, and there's no harm in telling you what they are, and you probably know already. One of them is pretty local, and that is, how are we going to pay for the share of this project that would, under normal circumstances, be allocated to the exchange contractors and indirectly to the Friant? And we don't have an answer for that. We've been meeting a lot with the exchange contractors in Friant, and they recognize there are benefits to this project to them in terms of quality and supply. But what they tell us so far is not enough to justify the entire share. You know, about 18% of the water from the Delta goes to the exchange contractors. So normally you'd say, well, that should be their share, but they feel they don't get the level of benefit that others do. That's a discussion that's continuing. Some of you are involved in it, I'm sure, and we have to resolve it one way or the other. I can't tell you what the solution is, but we know that the whole project has to be paid for. We can't leave part of it hanging out. We're not going to build an incomplete project, obviously. Another problem that I think we can resolve more easily is, you know, under the federal law, the Bureau of Reclamation cannot get what we call Section 10 coverage. You can't have a habitat conservation plan for the Bureau of Reclamation. It's the most bizarre thing. I have no idea why they did that, but we're living with it. They get Section 7 coverage, which we've been living with for many years and which is awful, but that's the best we can do. We want to be sure that all of our documents in our Bay Delta Conservation Plan provide the coverage the Bureau of Reclamation needs to participate in the project, because they are a more than equal partner here. If we want a new point of diversion, if we decide that a tunnel is the best project, or tunnels, we have to go to the State Water Board and say, hey, we want a new place of diversion of the Sacramento River, and the Bureau of Reclamation has to go separately. They can't go as part of us. They have to go separately because they have their own water rights. So the Bureau has to get the coverage that they need under this program. We do think there's a way to do that, but it's going to be somewhat complicated. So I'd like to give maybe a little bit of this project and a little bit of historic perspective. For one thing, we have a history of habitat conservation plans around the state and throughout the United States, actually, now for since the 90s. So we've got about 20 years of experience. And most people who take part in these habitat conservation plans, as hard as they can be to put together, if you follow some of the ones in San Diego County that were enormously controversial, they have worked out pretty well. Now this one having to do with water is definitely a project of a different color, but the history is good. I don't think a single one has ever been revoked. People always say, gee, if a species goes into jeopardy, then all bets are off, you're back to Section 7, you're back to ground zero, that might happen, sure it might. But no habitat conservation plan in the United States, that I know of at least, has ever been overthrown because a species went into jeopardy. And there are hundreds of species that are dealt with. They're mostly terrestrial, but at least we have a lot of experience. So this whole concept has a good history, and I think that's important. Another question is, and we hear this all the time, wouldn't it be easier, or at least more productive maybe, to just amend the Endangered Species Act so that the projects could operate in a better regulatory environment? And certainly, from the project's point of view, these are real restraints that are caused by the Endangered Species Act. But Senator Feinstein recently said she doubts that such a thing could happen. And whether or not it would or not, it's hard to say, and who knows what Congress would do. But to count on something that our senior senator thinks is doubtful is, I think, we shouldn't go there as long as we have a chance, at least, of making this program work. So it comes up, and I just wanted to mention it. Another thing that we have from the point of view of history is sort of funny is, the history is alive and with us today, and that is the governor of California. You know, when I was working for the governor many years ago, more than I want to talk about, he was very dedicated to this program and wanted it to happen. Now, some people say that's his father's legacy. Some people say he just wants to build stuff and get something done. But whatever it is, he believes in it. I don't think he would mind my saying that he really believes in this program and wants to get it done. And I'll confess that when I was only 2 years old, I'll say, I was appointed by Governor Reagan to something. I was on an Agricultural Water Quality Advisory Committee appointed by Governor Reagan. I was really young. And I've been appointed by almost every other governor since to something. But the chances of getting, at least in my history, of getting a governor who wants to do something and a president who's supportive of doing something at the same time is not a common occurrence. And so when all of you make the decision whether this is a good project or not, whether it's worth investing in, that's worth keeping in mind, because people say, well, we can always do it later if we need it, and maybe that's true, but it doesn't happen real often. And even Governor Reagan, who, in many ways was in favor of doing a lot of different things, delayed the implementation of the peripheral canal program so much that when his administration finally put out a draft EIR, his term was up, and it ended up having to roll over into the next term. So we haven't had a lot of governors who really wanted to address water. So we should take advantage of it, frankly. My feeling is take advantage of it. The other thing that worries me a lot is we rely on the Delta for a little less than 20% of our state's water supply. And it's really important to a lot of urban areas, and of course to the San Joaquin Valley as well. People sometimes forget that northern Contra Costa County is 100% reliant on water from the Delta, even though they're often viewed as the main opposition. They know they are 100% reliant on the Delta. They have no other water supplies. And that's mostly true of the Livermore area and largely true of Santa Clara County. So we are at risk. We really are at risk. And what's the level of risk? Heaven knows what the level of risk is. The USGS says there's going to be an earthquake, very likely in the next 40 years, an earthquake large enough to impair the Delta water supply. Think about it, impair the Delta water supply. And then how many years will it take to fix it? Well, we would hope less than a year, that would be great. Or a few years, but maybe it's 10 years. The project we're trying to build is an 8 to 10 year construction program. And so we know if the Delta failed and there was no recovery or long-term recovery, then we'd have to get busy and start building something. But that's the kind of outage we're looking at with economic damages in the $10 billion a year range. This is not something to take lightly. And to look at it from the state perspective, it's just a problem that has to be solved. No one here, and certainly not myself, would want to be in office if the Delta failed for a short or long period of time and say, what did you do to prevent this problem, which was preventable, at least largely preventable. Finally, as you're all considering your decisions about whether to invest in this project, I guess I would say everybody here lives in California. We're all Californians. And this project has a statewide impact that will go on for a long time. If you go down to the Edmonton pumping plant and take a look at the floors, those beautiful terrazzo floors that Bill Warren insisted be put in back in the 60s, these projects last for hundreds of years. The State Water Project, I think, will be working just fine 200 years from now. And we need something in the Delta to at least get the project to be more stable and reliable. And we all know, I think everyone here knows, that had we had this project in place this winter, past January, we could have exported 800,000 acre-feet more from the Delta under the existing regulations. We wouldn't have had to change the Endangered Species Act at all, just under the existing regulations. If we had that today, if we put it in San Luis, it'd be half full today, as opposed to we're more than half full. So we know this project can deliver some real benefits, and I hope as you decide whether or not to finance it, you'll keep in mind what the future may hold, both from the downside and also from the upside. Finally, I'd like to talk just a little bit about who supports this and who opposes it. It doesn't look very even, frankly. The supporters are organized labor, no surprise, 100,000 jobs if we built this project, and a lot more if that we would save if the Delta failed. We'd have a huge economic or job loss if the Delta failed for some reason. The business community, I think, is poised to be on board. They tell us they want to see the draft documents. But we're confident the LEAD coalition, which is the chambers from San Diego and LA and Long Beach and even up in the north in the Silicon Valley, and the Bay Area Council, they want to be supportive. I think they will be. We have our senators, Senators Boxer and Feinstein, have both written letters saying this is a good thing. We got a great letter from many of the LA delegation members from Congress, which is great. The legislature passed the bill in 2009. And we even have some environmental groups that I think in the end will find a way to support this project because they recognize the damage being done to the species. And I do want to give a special mention to Congressman Costa, who's just been terrific on this issue and always has been. So who's the opposition? That sounds pretty good. Who's the opposition to this? The Delta counties really are the ones the most concerned about it. They're worried about some things that I think they have a right to worry about. They're not being unreasonable. They're worried about their water rights. Are they going to keep their water rights? Well, of course, the state's position is, of course they're going to keep their water rights, but when you're reliant on inflow and you're at the bottom of the pipe, you're worried about your water rights. Will the state continue to invest in the Delta levees? We've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in maintaining the Delta levees. And the Delta counties go, well, if you build this tunnel, why would you keep investing in the levees? You don't need us anymore. And the answer is, wrong. We're still going to take half the water from the Delta channels because of the inflow from the San Joaquin River and so on. So yes, the state will continue, if the voters approve the money, to invest in Delta levees. And then they're worried about the construction impacts. That's especially in Sacramento County, in the southern part of the county. We went with tunnels because it seemed like it would really lessen the impacts, and it will. But, you know, this is a big project. And so people who live down in the Hood, Cortland area, they are going to see a lot of impacts. We're trying to mitigate those, but that's another concern. So we have to work with these Delta counties, give them some kind of mitigation as best we can. If the bond that's on the ballot passed, they would have funding that Senator Steinberg put in for their local projects. But you know, they're the core of the opposition, and their representatives in the legislature and in Congress, they reflect that opposition. And so once a week, on average, we get a letter from the Delta, congressmen mostly, saying you've done this wrong, you've done that wrong, or stop the project or whatever. And they're reflecting their constituents' views. It's legitimate. But we need a counterbalance. And so I always encourage those of you who are active talking to your elected officials, and of course you've got a great one here today, to let them know that their support is important too. From the governor's point of view, he hears more, frankly, from the opposition than he does from the supporters in the elected official realm. So we always welcome that support. We really need to have more of that if we can. And the other thing we need to do, I think, and all of you will take part in this as well, is be innovative in the financing of this project. We shouldn't just go, oh, here's another piece of the state water project, let's just add it onto the existing finance scheme and hope it all works out. Probably won't, or at least it's going to be on the edge. So we need people like Curtis and others who can be creative to figure out how this project can work for you in an economic sense. We get it. This is a business decision. You're all citizens of California and you want to do the right thing for the state and your county, but it's a business decision. We need to work with you to make that a reality and something that you can finance. We're not worried, frankly, that the urban agencies, Metropolitan, Santa Clara, and so on, they can afford this. It's not in the range where people would even notice it compared to their cell phone bill. Okay? The cell phone bill would be many times more expensive than this is going to cost them per month. That's not the problem. But most of this water coming out of the Delta, the majority of it goes to agriculture, and agriculture has to continue getting it. We certainly want to keep the agricultural economy in the San Joaquin Valley going. So that's our challenge for you and for ourselves. Make this project work for you financially, get you the level of assurance that you need. We have to do that a lot with our federal partners. And then we'll all join together and do the groundbreaking as soon as we can. Thank you very much.
Questions for the...
Couldn't have been that clear.
Mary, I have 4 when other people have got a chance.
I should have guessed.
Welcome, Dr. Meral. We meet again. For a long time, well, not a long time, the last few years are a competing paradigm with respect to the causes of fisheries. There's the traditional perspective that's mostly about the pumps and exports. There's new evidence that suggests it's a much more complex and broad problem. The comments we have tended to hear here in Kern County, federal wildlife fishery agencies, is it's still the pumps. What is your perspective on how these two different paradigms are working or not working within the BDCP context?
Well, you're right in that I don't know that they would say it's still the pumps. They would say we don't know what else we can do besides that we can rely on. Our side of things, maybe if I can put it in those terms, say we've seen examples in the North Delta where an island failed, Liberty, the Holland Tract, and so on, and we saw a lot more Delta smelt, to pick one example, come to life there and in the ship channel, and we think that there's a good chance that the habitat that was accidentally created, we didn't even do it ourselves, will produce a good response for that species, and we'll be able to relieve the pressure to have more exports. Now, all of you working together as the state and federal water contractors, and Westlands as your lead in this particular case, have bought a property called the Yolo Ranch, which will be converted into habitat of the type that we think will benefit Delta smelt, and we hope to break ground in that project next year. So we want to show them, rather than arguing about it, because there are different perspectives, we want to show them that we can make habitat work for these species and reduce the level of export. And they are very open to that. They've been really good about permitting the project. They want to see it go forward. Our own Department of Fish and Wildlife is a stronger believer, I think, in the habitat program than the federal agencies. But I think we're just going to have to show them as opposed to arguing about it. But the openness to hear it is there. They are open to hear it, and we have some pretty good scientists on our side too.
We don't have the time to show them by the time the deadline for making decisions on the permit.
That's right.
To show, I mean, they question the value of habitat again, particularly lately, and focused on outflow, which impacts export.
You're right.
So again, now we're in a no-win situation. We don't have time to show them what these alternatives will work by the time the permits need to be signed.
Well, I would agree with you that we are not going to know that. We have in our documents what's called the decision tree that says if we can show them, if we prove over the next 10 years that habitat works, outflow requirements will decrease. But if I were you, I would assume the worst, because the worst could happen. So I would look at the high outflow scenario, that we call the high outflow scenario, and add in the shared responsibility concept that improves the water supply, and see if it works for you in that way. I wouldn't do it on the come. I wouldn't do it on the hope that our theory that habitat works will prove out and we'll get all the benefits of that. If that happens, great, but you can't count on it. You have to be realistic. You can't count on it.
So what is the status of the shared responsibility proposal, wherein state contractors, federal contractors, and the federal government would figure out a way to acquire additional outflow supplies so that exports can be protected? And it might be the most effective way to protect fisheries if the fishery agencies in the traditional paradigm are right.
I mean, even if it...
But we haven't really heard that process is really moving forward. It's been problematic.
Well, I don't know. Mostly this is led by the agency. So Kern, Westlands, Met, and so on have been doing a very intensive round of meetings with the people who would be the sellers, frankly. Now, we have some interesting situations here. We have people like the exchange contractors, Yuba, and others who have traditionally sold water. So there's no shock in those regions to hear that there's a possible sale. And the amounts we're talking about are substantial, in the hundreds of thousands of acre feet. So my impression, I've only been to a few of those meetings, but my impression in talking to those agencies is there's a willingness to do it. The price, always a negotiable item. The other thing that has to be really avoided is interfering with purchases that the agencies themselves want to make, because we've had a long history of Westlands and others buying this water. But still, I'm getting a sense of optimism that that can be solid enough that people can count on it by the end of the year. Now, maybe Curtis might have better, more up-to-date information, but that's what I hear from both the state and federal contractors and as I talk to the other people who are the potential sellers. There's quite a bit out there, apparently.
Yes, well, my concern is more with the federal wildlife and fishery agencies, who I understand have been reluctant to work constructively on a shared responsibility proposal in a way that, I mentioned adaptive limits before, creates an adaptive floor so that we have sufficient supplies that we can rely upon to justify participation.
I would say that the initial way that they approached this was, and it's sort of the biologist's way of looking at the world, well, let's look at each species. What are the range of requirements that species need? And then they add them all up, and it gets broader and broader. You add them all up until it ends up being meaningless. And they recognized that themselves, actually, in their comments on the latest round of documents, and said, we have got to have real adaptive limits. So I haven't heard from them in the meetings that we've had a sense that that can't be done or shouldn't be done. In fact, it's sort of been the opposite. It's like we have got to make these limits valuable to the permittees. So maybe other people are getting different reactions. I don't get that in talking to them. I think they're very open to it. We'll see, though. It's not done. We'll see.
Brent Lowenhofer, Fish and Wildlife Service Director, was quoted recently as saying, the project in its current form is unpermittable. Is that accurate in terms of how they characterize this project?
Oh, I would say it's accurate to the extent that our documents aren't ready for publication. I mean, if we put out the documents we have today, they would probably say, that's unreal, you can do this or that. But I've also heard him say that it's correctable and that we can develop, I mean, in our meetings, and I think he said it publicly, our meetings say, he says in our meetings, we can get to a permittable project. I think he's referring just to the state of the current documents. In the end, you know, there's very strong directive from the Obama administration, from the Council on Environmental Quality to the federal agencies, make this project happen. And we hear from that level, we met with Secretary Jewell, we were in Washington a couple weeks ago, that they want to get this done. That word is getting down to that level of the agency, you know, regional directors. We'll see in the end. I mean, I'm not going to tell you it's done. It's not. But I think we can get a permittable project, and I think we can do it this fall. I don't think we have to wait a long time to do that.
Finally, the cynics among us in this crowd would say, well, of course we can get a permittable project. A project that yields 5.0 million acre feet makes it unaffordable for Kern County, among others.
Well, it's not much point in going through all this work and spending all the money you've so generously provided to give you a project that you can't live with. The agencies are very aware of that. You know, one of the reasons this shared responsibility idea came up was just to try to solve that problem. In the end, the fish agencies have to make findings based on biology, but they have to show some flexibility too, and they always have in these habitat conservation plans. We do have some extraordinarily good partners in those agencies. I know it always looks like they're raising these questions, but my experience with a lot of them is they want to make this work and they know it's got to be affordable. This isn't an exercise. This is for real. We'll see. I'm not telling you it's done, not done, but you'll know this fall, I think, whether it is or it is not.
Dr. Meral, I hope when I reach your age I am as optimistic in my outlook as you are.
You almost have to be.
Now others can ask really good questions.
You got any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I got a couple. Since World War II has ended, and Shasta is still unfinished because of it, if they were to finish Shasta, how much more acre feet would there be, and is that enough to compensate for the bushwater for the sea rise?
It's not enough. The Bureau says that their current proposal of raising it 18.5 feet, which is right underneath the railroad bridge, which is where they get that number from, they don't want to do that $2 billion railroad relocation, so their 18.5 feet is as high as they can go. They say it could produce in the neighborhood of 150,000 acre feet of new water supply, which is nothing to be laughed at, and the price is right. It's only $1 billion. So that's as much as they see in this round. Theoretically, Shasta could be raised to be many times its current size, but the cost would be astronomical because of the relocations. When they built the railroad and Highway 5, they just didn't contemplate Shasta that's 2 or 3 times as big as it is now. So this round, at least, they're saying 18.5 feet, and that's about the amount of water they say we could reliably get out of it.
Okay, you talked about getting federal funds, which would be nice, especially on the mitigation. How much acreage is that? Really supposed to be 100,000 acres?
Well, we're in the plan itself to get to the species benefit level that we want to get to, and assuming, going back to the last question, that tidal marsh habitat will provide the food these smelt fish need, and we don't need as much outflow. If you assume all those things, then it's over 100,000 acres. But some of that is also just getting easements on existing agricultural land, keeping it in production so that species like the garter snake and the Swainson's hawk will just continue, you know, to thrive. But in terms of conversion, it would be less than 100,000 acres. In the Delta, we're confident that if we go with state-owned land, we own a lot of land in the Delta now. We bought Sherman Island and Twitchell and so on. We go with unused land. If you fly over the Delta, there's a remarkable amount of land that just is not in production. And we go with very low value production land that's really not in very high level of agricultural production. We can do those land conversions without really impairing the Delta agricultural economy. And we don't want to. We really don't want to hurt the people in the Delta. And of course they'd be compensated no matter what. So we think we can do that level of 100,000 plus acres without really hurting any of the high value crops or any of the communities certainly in the Delta. That's our goal anyway.
Would Conservancy's Could that, or does it have to be fee title?
It could be either. Easements would work in a lot of cases, does not always have to be fee title. We've had farmers come to us and say, you know, I can grow tidal marsh. And so, you know, we're open to any possibility, no matter what the land would say on the tax rolls. We would not remove any land from the tax rolls. The state would continue to pay the
You
taxes.
thought about letting the state fish and wildlife in on the deal there? Seem to be trying to get rid of the Pittman Robertson place right now.
Well, we certainly don't want to get rid of Pittman Robinson. It's been a
I
tremendous.
on the scene, you know.
Yeah. There's no comparable state funding. We're assuming bond funding, state bond funding. We've had a lot of water bonds. We have another one on the ballot next year to pay for most of this habitat work. There is some mitigation required by the contractors. Mostly we're looking at state general fund and federal funds. We don't want to ignore the federal funds that we get today to use for this.
Have you done any drilling for the tunnels, bore samples, and where are you going to put the stuff?
Yes, good question. So we have done some geotech work in the Delta, and this won't surprise any of you who work with dirt, but it's really pretty good dirt. And naturally, it's never been impaired by toxics or any other human activity. It's 150 feet below the Delta. And so some people say, oh, you're going to have millions of cubic yards of this awful stuff. Our current thought is we can probably sell it on eBay. I mean, this is going to be pretty high valuable material if you want to build levees in the Delta or fill in low spots in your island or whatever. So we're increasingly confident we can use whatever we get out of having to drill, if we go with the tunnel route, whatever we get from the tunnels we can use on the islands where it comes out. It's going to be pretty valuable material. In the South Bay, when they replaced or actually duplicated the Hetch Hetchy tunnel underneath the South Bay, they found that they could use virtually all that material to restore wetlands in the Don Edwards Refuge down in the South Bay. So this will be good material. I don't expect any toxics coming out of it, and we'll find a way to use it. We're getting a lot of interest now, actually, in that.
One last question. Dr. Meral, thank you very much.